My brother disappeared just as my mother was dying and left me a letter instead of a goodbye. Minneapolis was bitterly cold that night. In room 12A at Horizon Oaks, a rehabilitation center about 25 minutes from downtown, it was just me, my dying mother, and the steady beeping of the bedside monitor. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of a sleepless night when I realized I am the last person left in the family. I am Daniel, 34 years old, living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. On that white night, I sat alone in room 12A at the University of Minnesota Hospital. Outside the glass door, the streetlights glinted on the melting snow, but inside, it was just me, my mother, and the steady beeping of the heart monitor. My mother, Helen, lay there emaciated and motionless after a severe stroke. Her gray hair was spread out on the white pillow, her face more wrinkled than ever. Looking at her, I felt like time was flowing backwards, taking away all the vitality she once had. I didn't leave this hospital for 3 days and 3 nights. Every time the nurse came to take my blood pressure or check my medication, I would wake up from the hard plastic chair. But what startled me the most was the complete absence of my brother, Michael. Where was he? I called, I texted, I emailed and voicemailed everything. He texted once saying he was on his way from San Francisco, but then nothing. Not a call back, not an apology, not a show. And perhaps it was not the first time he did so. Michael had always been a freewheeling type, easy to initiate and disappear. Whenever his family needed him most, he would shut down. But this time was different. This wasn't the holidays. This was a moment my mother might never wake up from. This was a moment that if he weren't there, there would never be another chance. I held my mother's hand. Hers was cold and dry like old paper. I remembered the times she had taken me to school in the winter, her back bent over by the snow, her coat thin, but her hand still holding mine firmly. Now I'm the one holding her. But beside me, there's no one. There's no my brother. I don't know if I'm more angry or sad. My heart feels tight, heavy like a block of ice that won't melt. And then the door opened slightly. A man walked in. He was wearing a long gray coat and thin-rimmed glasses. I recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Parker, a lawyer who has been with my family for almost 15 years. He worked with my dad when he was alive and kept in touch even after that. "Hello, Daniel," he said, his voice low but serious. "I apologize for coming at this hour, but there is something Michael asked me to deliver to you." I stopped. "Michael." He took a white envelope out of his briefcase. There was no address, just a scribbled note, "Daniel." I recognized it immediately. It was my brother's handwriting. My hand shook slightly as I took it. My heart was pounding against my chest. I looked at Mr. Parker. He just nodded as if to say, "Open it." I pulled out the paper. It was a folded piece of paper. The ink was smudged. He must have written it quickly. Every word on it weighed heavily on my heart. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I can't come. I know it sucks. I'm just not strong enough, not like you. I signed away my assets. You deserve to keep it all, because you were always there for Mom. Don't look for me. I have to go far away. Start over from a place where no one knows who I used to be. If possible, please forgive, and take care of Mom one last time for me. Michael." I read the letter repeatedly, each time feeling like a new stab. It wasn't because I was angry at Michael. I had been angry before, many times, but this time the pain wasn't from anger, but it is the accept. My brother is gone. There was no direct farewell hug or "hang in there, little brother." Just a few scribbles, a decision to give up, and a wish for his mother, whom he had not come to see off for the last time. I folded the paper and tucked it into my breast pocket close to my heart, as if doing so would somehow keep Michael in my life. Mr. Parker stood there, his hands clasped together. "He called me from Utah," he said softly. told me that if you asked, he needed time. A life that wasn't about whose son, heir to what. Just a normal person starting over. I nodded slightly. Say nothing. How can I explain that? I understand that I had wanted to disappear 2 years ago when my father died, and I was the only one left to attend the funeral, and Michael was backpacking in Peru and wouldn't answer his phone for a week. I thought, I wish I could disappear like him, but I didn't. I stayed. I always stay. Maybe every family has someone like that. Always the one left to pick up the pieces. I turned to look at my mother. Her face was the same, still pale. The monitor kept beeping steadily, a reminder she was still here. Alive. Even if only barely. I pulled the blanket back for Mom and adjusted her pillow. I'd been taking care of her since the emergency room, but this was probably the first time I had truly accepted that I was the only one who was with her. Until the very end. Something strange happened just then. I'm not angry with Michael anymore. I no longer wait for his call. Imagine him opening the door and exclaiming, "Baby, I'm sorry, no more." I began to see one thing clearly, perhaps. This was the first time in my life I was truly standing alone. Without needing to hope for anyone, and no longer expecting fairness or sharing. Just me, and the right thing to do. I turned back to Mr. Parker and nodded slightly. "Thank you for bringing the letter." He said nothing more. He squeezed my shoulder, then turned and closed the door behind him. The door closed quietly, but I heard it clearly, like the end of a chapter. The end of a chapter is about a family with 4 members, then 3, then 2, and now almost 1. I sat down and took the paper out of my pocket again. My eyes were no longer blurred with tears. I reread it one last time. Then I folded it carefully, more carefully than before. I put it in my wallet, where I kept my most precious things. I held my mother's hand again. Her hand was a little warmer now, like a small sign that she was still here, still waiting for me. I whispered, "I'm not going anywhere, Mom." The next morning, I woke up in the same hospital room. The same plastic chair, steady beeping sound, now part of my breathing. My body ached, my neck ached, but I didn't complain, because something inside me had changed. Mom is still alive, and I'm still here. The nurse knocked on the door and entered polite as always. "Mr. Daniel, the doctor, wants to see you in the office on the 3rd floor. It's about your mother's long-term care." I nodded, not surprised. My mother, even if she survives, will never be able to care for herself again. The brain damage has affected her movement and speech. The doctors say that if she wakes up, she may not even remember me. But I don't allow myself to fall for that. At the doctor's office, I was handed a stack of documents, a long-term treatment plan, costs of care, a list of suitable rehabilitation centers in Minneapolis. And finally, they gave me a cost estimate, roughly $58,000 for the first 6 months. I swallowed. I don't have that money. I work as a warehouse manager for a retail chain, steady income, but not abundant. Savings. Yes, but not enough for this. I used to think that if something big happened, I could at least share the burden with my brother. But now I'm the only one on the bank account. The only one given temporary guardianship, because Michael has voluntary renunciation all on one piece of paper. I remember Mr. Parker's eyes last night when he said Michael has signed all the papers giving up ownership. He is the only legal guardian left. The hospital and the financial center now looked in one direction, me. I returned to my mother's room, calling the bank. I needed to check her savings and insurance and see if there was anything else I could use. The response from the bank was as cold as a hurricane bulletin. Her savings were almost empty. The medical bills from a few months ago had been almost all gone. I sat down on my usual chair, looked at my mother, silent. I'm not a good complainer, but at that moment, one sentence rang out in my head, Why does everything have to fall on me? I stopped looking for answers. No one could answer. I know my mother won't be cared for properly if I don't do something. If I don't stand up, there will be no one left. I picked up the phone. I called the company. Yeah, I haven't used up all my vacation days, but I need to work extra nights, whatever I can get. I'll make it work. I need the extra income for the next few months. The manager on the other side hesitated, but then agreed. I hung up. Part of me felt bad. I knew I wouldn't get any rest. But the other part deep down felt like relief. I chose this path. No one forced me. I looked at my mother. Her eyes were still closed, her face peaceful. It was as if she knew I would do the right thing. As if she had always believed in me and my subconscious to be the one who would stay to keep the family from falling apart completely. One is not stronger than another, but don't leave. 4 days later, I moved my mother in. Horizon Oaks, a rehabilitation center in suburban Bloomington, about a 25-minute drive from Minneapolis. It's not fancy, but it's clean, quiet, has private rooms and a 24/7 care team. I chose it after comparing 6 different centers, looking at price lists, nurse reviews, talking directly to the coordinator. When the day came to sign the contract, I had to withdraw all my savings, $12,200. Standing at the reception desk, holding the advance bill in my hand, I remembered the nights I sat typing reports in the cold storage, eating instant noodles next to the cargo box and saying, "Save a little. Who knows, you might need it tomorrow." Now then, it is needed. It was a chilly day. After setting up my mother's room, I returned to my small apartment in South Minneapolis, a place I hadn't been to in almost a week. When I opened the door, the smell of old furniture wafted in. The room was quiet, as if time had stopped. A box of paper was next to the door, all bills and advertisements. I put down my bag, made a cup of hot water, and stared blankly at the kitchen table. Everything is fine, I thought, but not sure. I took my mother's papers out of my bag, medical copies, insurance information, and a small unmarked brown envelope with nothing on it but 2 scribbled words, "Private." I don't remember when I first got it. Maybe Mr. Parker gave it to me when he signed the papers, or perhaps the nurse gave it to me when she handed over Mom's things. I opened it and froze. Inside, ISA savings bookhold from 2004 in my mom's name, local bank, First Midwest Bank, and current balance $23,731.099. I stared at the number like it was teasing me, rechecked it, then looked at the last update date 3 months before Mother had a stroke. I don't believe in miracles, but at that moment I laughed. Alone in the empty room, a twisted laugh, both relieved and painful. Mom didn't say anything, didn't mention it, didn't entrust it. She kept the money to herself, maybe because she feared we'd fight. Perhaps she planned to use it when she needed it most. Or maybe she didn't want to bother anyone, and now I'm the one who found it. I went to the bank the next day. The teller confirmed that the book was still valid, and after going through some paperwork to prove that I was the legal guardian, they asked me to come back to complete the withdrawal or transfer paperwork. Just a sum of money. But to me at that time, it was like someone's hand reaching out in the middle of a flood. Not a complete rescue, but enough for me. Cling, keep breathing. That evening, I visited my mother. She was still not fully awake, but her eyelids began to respond slightly to my voice. I sat down next to her and told her stories, about the savings book, about how I chose this center because of the red maple tree outside the window. She loved maple trees. When I was little, every time the red leaves fell, she would collect them and press them into a book, teaching me to keep the best things. I put my hand on her hand. "You know, Mom, I'll try to keep everything nice," I said, even though I'm alone. A week after I brought my mother to Horizon Oaks, my life fell into a new rhythm. I stopped by the center in the morning to visit my mother. Afternoon work in the warehouse. At night, take extra shifts at the shipping yard. Loading, unloading, data entry, anything that can bring in a few extra bucks. I don't complain. There's no one to complain to. Living simply arranging everything yourself sometimes feels easier. No one depends on you except your mother. No one argues, no one criticizes. No more sayings like, "Why do you always make a big deal out of everything? Just let things be, Daniel." Michael's favorite saying is that every time he disappears, he returns like nothing happened. One Wednesday afternoon, I left Horizon Oaks later than usual. It was cold early and the wind whistled against the windshield. When I got home, I found a note tucked under my door. Not a letter from the bank, not a flyer, but a handwritten note in clear italics, "Daniel. We'd like a small community meeting to raise money for Aunt Helen. She's a wonderful person in the neighborhood. Please come Friday, 7 Huzuro at number 14, Aunt Margaret's. You don't need to bring anything. Just bring yourself." I stopped Margaret. She is 72 years old, has lived next door to my mother for nearly 30 years and used to pick apples from her garden every fall. I remember her once saying, "My mother is the only person in this town who remembers every child's birthday." I sat down on the chair still holding the paper. My heart felt warm. Not bright, not fiery, but a gentle warmth like the early winter sun shining through a window. I don't think anyone cares. Really. 2 days later, I arrived at number 14. About a dozen people in the small living room, neighbors, a few old friends of Mom's and Uncle Bill, who used to mow Mom's lawn every month. They had placed a simple wooden box with a note for Helen, a friend, a neighbor, a fighter. I don't know what to say. I just sat there listening to them tell stories about their mothers, how Mom always brought cookies to elementary school even though no one asked, how she drove Anna to the hospital 5 years ago when she had a miscarriage and didn't have a car, and how she once quietly paid the electricity bill for house number 19, a young, unemployed couple. I didn't know. Mom had done so much in secret. When I got home, my phone lit up a text message. No number, no name saved, just one line. "You've always been stronger than me, and that makes me feel ashamed. I'm in Missoula. If you still want to know why, just say it." I stared at the words. Part of me wanted to throw the phone away. Another part just wanted to ask, why? I didn't answer right away. I put the phone on the table and made hot tea. Mom likes Earl Grey. In my head at that moment, only one question echoed, do people change? My mother died on a Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't raining, it wasn't sunny. It was a light gray afternoon, as if the sky was whispering something no one could hear. She was not in pain. She was not startled. She could not say her last words. Just go. I was there. So was Michael. We stood on either side of the bed. Nothing was said. No one cried. We just watched her as the graph on the heart monitor flattened to a line no more beeps. Everything was silent. The old nurse came in, bowed slightly, and drew the curtain back. That was the moment I understood. The most incredible things in life often come quietly, without effect, without sound. Mom's funeral was small me. Michael, Margaret, Uncle Bill, 2 employees from Horizon Oaks, and a few old neighbors. No fancy flowers, no moving speeches, just a simple goodbye the way Mom had lived her life. Michael didn't speak. Neither did I. But after the burial, when only he and I were left standing next to the newly cemented tombstone, he turned to me and said, "I will not disappear again." I looked at him, didn't nod, didn't shake, just said, "You don't need to promise, just live up to what's left." He was silent, but for the first time in years I saw his eyes not evade. 3 months later, I returned to Horizon Oaks, not to visit my mother this time, but to file volunteer registration. I help deliver meals, push wheelchairs, and talk to older people who have no one else around. 3 times a week. No one pays me. but I get more in return than I expected. Feel like I still have something to give, even small. My apartment is still the same. Every morning, I make Earl Grey tea. The second cup sits by the window, a habit no one sees. I've started drawing, something my mother told me I should try when I was 10. Now, I'm trying. I'm not waiting for anyone anymore, no more resentment. I just lived, and knew I had gone through a proper farewell with my mother, brother, and old me. If you've made it this far, you've probably been a stayer yourself. Maybe you've carried things that no one else saw. Perhaps you've wished someone had shared it with you, but there was no one. If my story resonates with you, leave a line in the comments. It doesn't have to be long, just, I know how that feels. Or, if you want to share your story, I and everyone here are listening, because this is more than just a YouTube channel. This is a place for the quiet ones to be heard. Let's subscribe channel, turn on notifications, because every week I'll tell you a real story of real people living quietly in this noisy world.